It was meant to capture grief and not guilt. March 1902, Salem, Massachusetts. A cold wind swept through the churchyard as mourners gathered around the coffin of Eleanor Ashford, 29 years old, beloved and newly dead. Her family wanted one final photograph, a solemn portrait to remember her by. The coffin was placed open, her face peaceful beneath the lace veil, and the photographer prepared the flash. Behind her, a crowd of black-clad mourners bowed their heads in silence. The camera clicked once. A single moment, frozen forever in silver and shadow, but when the image developed, something was wrong. One of the men in the back wasn't mourning. He wasn't even looking at the coffin. His gaze was fixed directly at the lens, and his faint smile didn't belong at a funeral. Within a week, whispers spread through Salem. Because the man in that photograph, the one standing just behind the coffin, wasn't a stranger at all. He was Eleanor's husband. And soon everyone would learn. He was also her killer. Eleanor Ashford was the pride of Salem, a woman of quiet grace and rare intelligence. Born into comfort, raised in a home scented with cedar and candlelight, she carried herself like a figure from a painting. Her father, Jonathan Ashford, was a merchant known across Massachusetts for his silverware trade. And when Eleanor married Henry Whitlock, a respected local apothecary, the town celebrated their union as the perfect match. Beauty and intellect joined with ambition and charm. But what the people of Salem saw was only the surface. Beneath that polished image, the Whitlock home grew colder by the day. Neighbors began whispering about the strange sounds that drifted through the open windows at night. The quiet sobs of a woman, the soft clinking of glass bottles, the faint, chemical scent of bitter almonds. It started slowly. Eleanor's hands began to tremble as she poured her tea. Her complexion, once rosy and warm, turned pale and waxed. She suffered dizzy spells that left her grasping at walls and headaches that pulsed behind her eyes like thunder. Henry, ever the devoted husband, assured everyone it was just exhaustion. The delicate nerves of a sensitive woman, he prepared her. Restorative tonics from his own apothecary, blends of herbs and tinctures he claimed would strengthen her heart. But each glass left her weaker, her eyes dimmer. By February 1902, she could barely rise from bed. One winter morning, as the snow piled thick upon the windowsill, Henry told the maid that Eleanor was sleeping peacefully. She never woke again. The doctor signed the death certificate, heart failure due to exhaustion. Henry wept before the neighbors, spoke of his grief with trembling hands, and spared no expense on her funeral. White lilies, her favorite, lined the pews of St. Paul's Church. He even hired a photographer, a man named Albert Winslow, to take a final portrait before her burial. A photograph to remember her by, but when the glass plate developed, something in the background, something no one noticed at first, changed everything, because in that photograph, the killer stood right beside her, and he was smiling. Before her death, Eleanor Ashford's life had been one of delicate routine and quiet refinement. Mornings were spent tending to her small garden behind the Whitlock residence, the air filled with the scent of lavender and mint. She pruned rose bushes with care, humming softly as she moved through the sunlit rows, her hands delicate yet precise. Afternoons found her at the grand piano in the parlor, ivory keys gleaming as she played classical pieces, her fingers floating over them with practiced grace. Evenings were reserved for reading beside the fireplace, the warm glow of the embers illuminating her face as she traced words with her eyes lost in thought. To the townspeople of Salem, Eleanor and Henry seemed the epitome of devotion. He, the attentive apothecary, always punctual and courteous. She, the perfect wife, serene and charming. Neighbors often saw Henry walking home from his shop, cradling a bottle of her favorite tonic or a small bouquet of flowers, and greeting everyone politely with a polite nod. On the surface, it was a life of idyllic normalcy, but behind closed doors, the house whispered a different story. Servants murmured of arguments, subtle at first, then more heated. They said Eleanor had begun refusing the tonics Henry brought her, complaining that her chest burned after each dose. The tension was tangible, lingering in the corners of the dimly lit rooms, the heavy curtains and the polished wood floors. One maid would later testify that on the night before Eleanor's death, she overheard a confrontation between the couple. Eleanor's trembling voice pierced the parlor door. "You've been giving me something, haven't you?" Henry's reply was silence, broken only by the sound of glass shattering somewhere in the room. Fear and confusion gripped the household. When Eleanor was discovered lifeless the following morning, Henry was calm. He instructed the staff not to summon a doctor, claiming it was too late. He personally oversaw her preparation, dressing her in a simple white gown, arranging her hands neatly over her chest, with a single white rose between her fingers. The pose was meant to make her appear serene, a perfect image of repose. Yet to the maid who witnessed it all, something felt off. The calmness in Henry's demeanor, the meticulous arrangement of Eleanor's body, it did not resemble grief. It looked instead like guilt, carefully masked behind a veneer of respectability and ritual. The house itself seemed to echo this tension, the walls heavy with secrets no one dared speak aloud, a silent testament to a life cut short under mysterious circumstances. The funeral took place 2 days after Eleanor's sudden passing. The sky over Salem was heavy with clouds, and rain fell in thin silver sheets, coating the cobblestones of the streets leading to St. Paul's Church. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and melting wax, thick with the solemnity of the occasion. Candles flickered beneath the tall stained glass windows, casting shifting patterns of red and gold across the polished pews. Mourners filled the church, their black clothing rustling as they whispered prayers under their breath. Each face was pale, each voice hushed, and yet tension hummed invisibly beneath the solemnity. Henry Whitlock stood at the head of the coffin, rigid and composed. He did not cry, did not tremble. To those watching, he appeared the perfect widower, calm, respectful, and quietly dignified. He insisted that a photograph be taken before the burial. "It's what she would have wanted," he said softly, his voice almost lost beneath the low murmur of mourners. No one dared challenge him. The photographer, William Dreer, arranged his heavy tripod and fragile glass plates. He positioned the magnesium flash carefully, asking everyone to hold still. The coffin was opened, revealing Eleanor's pale, serene face framed delicately in lace. Her mother sat nearby, weeping quietly, while her father maintained a stoic presence at the side. The flash burst across the church, a blinding white light that froze 12 mourners in an instant. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then silence returned. Mourners exhaled, shifting nervously, whispering consolations to each other. But Dreer later told police that he had seen something impossible in that split second before the shutter clicked. Henry had not looked grief-stricken. Instead, he had turned slightly toward Dreer and smiled. Not a faint, polite smile of mourning, not a quivering expression of sorrow, but a slow, deliberate grin, one that conveyed satisfaction rather than loss. When Dreer developed the photograph later that evening in his darkroom, his hands shook violently. The image revealed Eleanor's tranquil face, her mother's tear-streaked cheeks, and Henry Whitlock, positioned behind the coffin, eyes fixed on the camera, mouth curled in a sinister grin. The next morning, when Dreer presented the print to Eleanor's family, the reaction was immediate and violent. Her mother fainted upon seeing it. Her father recoiled, whispering, "That's not a man in mourning." Every mourner who glimpsed the image later described an icy chill, a sense that the photograph had captured more than grief. It had captured the hidden malevolence lurking behind Henry Whitlock's carefully maintained facade, a shadow that would never leave the house or its history. After the shocking funeral, the photograph of Eleanor Ashford began circulating quietly through Salem. It was shown in whispers behind closed doors, passed from neighbor to neighbor under the cover of polite curiosity. Everyone who saw it agreed on one thing. There was something deeply wrong about Henry Whitlock's expression. His face carried a subtle cruelty, a sense of satisfaction hidden beneath the mask of respectability and grief. The more people looked, the more it seemed alive, almost as if the man in the photo were aware that he was being watched. Rumors swelled, and the local constable could no longer ignore them. A formal inquiry was opened, and Eleanor's body was exhumed for a second autopsy. The coroner's report revealed a horror that shook the town to its core. Traces of arsenic were found in her organs, enough to kill several men. The poison had been administered slowly over weeks, disguised in tonics and nightly prescriptions. The source was undeniable, a tincture from Henry's own apothecary. When questioned, Henry Whitlock maintained a composed denial. He claimed the arsenic came from rat poison stored carelessly in the cellar, but investigators quickly discovered ledger entries showing purchases of arsenic powder under false names, alongside witness statements that painted a darker picture. One maid confessed she had seen Henry mixing Eleanor's nightly tonic in secret. Another recalled him muttering ominously, "She'll be still soon." By the end of March, Henry Whitlock was arrested and charged with murder. The photograph, the very image he had insisted on taking at the funeral, became Exhibit A in the courtroom. For 3 days, the jurors were unable to look away. They described the sensation of the man in the image watching them, daring them to speak, a silent predator frozen in time. When the verdict was read, Henry did not flinch. Guilty. Sentenced to hang. Yet before the execution, he requested to see the photograph one last time. When the warden brought it forward, Henry's lips curled into the same chilling smile captured in the image. He whispered softly, "She wanted me to remember her that way." Then he laughed, a sound that seemed to echo the grim satisfaction from the photograph itself. And witnesses later swore that his reflection in the dark glass of the frame grinned back at him, as if the camera had preserved more than just a memory. It had preserved a crime, and a soul tainted beyond redemption. After Henry Whitlock's execution, the fate of the infamous funeral photograph remained shrouded in mystery. Some claimed the police destroyed it to prevent further scandal, while others whispered that it had been sold to a private collector, someone fascinated by the macabre. Yet wherever it went, the photograph seemed to carry a darkness that could not be buried. In 1904, barely 2 years after Eleanor's death, William Dreer, the photographer who had captured the image, was found dead in his studio. His camera lay on the floor, the glass plate negative still inside, burned black around the edges, as if some unseen heat had singed it from the inside. His assistant, speaking to local reporters, recalled Dreer's final words with trembling voice. "It moved." She looked at me. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle, only an air of oppressive silence lingering in the room, as if the shadows themselves had watched him die. Rumors spread quickly. Anyone who had handled the photograph soon suffered misfortune. Margaret Ashford, Eleanor's grieving mother, passed away peacefully in her sleep, yet her death was marked by an unnatural pallor. The constable who had reopened the case went blind in one eye under mysterious circumstances. Even the coroner who had examined Eleanor's body was later found drowned in a shallow creek, curiously, with no water in his lungs. By the 1920s, Salem's residents had begun to refer to the image as the widow's picture. It was believed to be cursed, a spectral trap preserving the final moments of both the victim and her killer. It captured not just grief but the lingering echo of murder, forever frozen between life, death, and observation. In 1938, a London collector claimed to have unearthed the photograph in an antiquarian shop. In his journal, he described it vividly, a funeral scene faded but intact. The woman's eyes are closed, yet her lips seem to move when the light hits the glass. By morning, he was found dead, and the photograph had vanished once more, leaving only a cracked frame behind, split in two. Even decades later, whispers continued that the image could appear unexpectedly in an attic, a frame, or a forgotten studio, and anyone who gazed too long into Eleanor's serene yet unnatural face risked seeing her death, and the malice of her killer come alive once again. The photograph had become more than history. It had become a legend, a dark truth uncaged, forever haunting those who dared to look. Today, the church where Eleanor Ashford's funeral was held no longer stands. Official reports claim it burned down in 1956 after a lightning strike, but locals insist the story is far darker. They whisper that it wasn't lightning at all, that some unseen hand, or perhaps justice itself, had finally consumed the building. The ground where the altar once stood remains barren. No grass grows, and the soil seems heavy, as if the earth itself remembers the secrets buried there. Visitors to the site often report strange occurrences. On quiet evenings, they say you can hear the faint echo of a camera shutter, metallic and crisp, followed by the hiss of a match and the lingering scent of burned magnesium. The same smell that would have filled the church during William Dreer's fatal photograph session. Some claim they've glimpsed fleeting shadows moving near the remnants of the church walls, as if the mourners in the photograph still linger in the air, trapped between life and death. In Salem's archives, one blurred copy of the funeral photograph survives. Eleanor's face is barely visible, her features faded with time. Yet the outline of Henry Whitlock's sinister smile remains unnervingly sharp. Even after more than a century, those eyes seem alive, following anyone who dares to stare back. Historians dismiss the image as superstition, a relic of Victorian post-mortem fascination. But archivists who guard the photograph are more cautious. They never turn it fully toward the light. One young archivist, curious and unafraid, once did. He later described seeing a reflection, not his own but of a woman in white, standing just behind his shoulder. When he turned, no one was there. The experience left him pale, shaken, and convinced that the photograph carried more than memory. It carried intent, a presence that refused to fade. Over decades, the widow's picture has become part of Salem lore, a reminder that some images do more than capture moments. They capture truths too terrible to remain hidden. And the church may have crumbled, yet the photograph survives, carrying Eleanor's final, haunted gaze and Henry's eternal, malevolent smile, waiting for the next person foolish enough to look. And see, a photograph is meant to preserve memory, a moment frozen in time, a reflection of life we refuse to let go. But some memories refuse to rest. They linger, restless, watching, waiting. In March 1902, one shutter captured more than grief. It captured guilt, not remembrance but revenge. Eleanor Ashford's funeral photograph didn't just immortalize her loss. Hidden within its frame was the man who caused it, Henry Whitlock. Smiling behind the coffin, his expression calm, deliberate, almost triumphant. Those who saw the image closely claimed they felt it stare back. Some said the eyes of the deceased flickered as if aware. Others swore the man behind her shifted when they blinked, the smile growing wider each time. Over the decades, the photograph disappeared and reappeared in whispers, in archives, collectors' hands, even forgotten attics, leaving a trail of unease, misfortune, and unexplained deaths. If you ever come across an old funeral portrait, look carefully. Don't just see the sorrow. Look at the shadows, the edges, the ones standing behind the deceased. Because sometimes the dead aren't alone. Sometimes the killer is smiling right beside them. Some images carry more than memory. They carry intent, malice, a frozen moment of truth that refuses to fade. And as always, the truth was never buried. It was only developed. This is Truth Uncaged. If you crave stories where history's shadows still breathe, subscribe, stay curious, and remember, some images don't fade when the light goes out. They wait, watching, always.